Hello, everyone.
Hello, everybody.
Today is a very special day because you get to see what is behind this mic.
Yes. Our new boy.
I guess if you've been on the Instagram, this isn't a big surprise, but there he is.
There's the boy. Can everyone see him? Yes, a snake.
Happy Back to Hogwarts Day, Angela. It's Back to Hogwarts Day, and we've already opened the Chamber of Secrets.
Yes,
have our
we
little basilisk out.
Dan does not like snakes, I take it.
Oh, you don't like snakes?
Yormi, what are you doing?
Oh, no. Never have a rattlesnake for a pet.
No. Oh my god, no, never.
He's just like, this is in your way of the mic. Let me just move this for you. Already helping out.
What a good boy. Oh, ouch.
Oh, I remember you telling us that story. Yeah, that had to be like one of the most terrifying things.
Being bit by a rattlesnake. Was it a dry bite?
Yeah, that's fair enough. I've been bit by snakes a few times in my life, but never anything venomous.
What are you doing?
He just wants to curl up there. He likes the pop filter.
Yes, he does. Here, everyone.
So much for, oh, here, I move the mic. I don't want to move it because I have snake hands.
Yeah, well.
Well, now we have a snake mic.
Julius Squeezer.
Oh, that's great.
That is a good name. So yeah, apparently we're just hanging out here now. That's what he's doing.
We had a lot of trouble coming up with a name for him.
We did.
Because Ramona just wanted to call him Snaky.
Yep.
She still to this day refuses to call him anything else but Snaky. But we came to the conclusion we'd call him Jormungandr.
Yep, that's his name. Jormungandr.
Kind of cliche, but we're both very into Norse mythology, so. But, I mean, obviously he's too cute to be a world serpent, so I call him Yormi.
He's gonna slide right off. Yep, there he goes. Yeah, buddy, you're not gonna... He's trying so hard to hang on.
He is. He's learning the hard way. Ooh, spiders, no.
Spiders don't bother me.
Yeah.
They really don't bother me. But I know you're a bit
clear on your phone and fuzzy on the TV? I don't know. Is the connection on your TV like bad? Or are you like casting it from your phone?
Oh, that's a good question.
I like how he's looking exactly.
He's looking right at the camera. Yep.
What a showman.
Already he knows how to be a star.
Oh, okay. I don't know.
Where are you going, buddy?
Yeah, everything's good on our end.
Thank you, Ren. He is our nice boy.
I've had him for a couple weeks now, but our streams never coincide to when we can bring him out because he usually eats. Like a day before we stream. Oh, there he wants to give you kisses. Or Tom, if you have like a 4K TV, I mean, we stream at 1080p, 60 FPS, so that could be it. So 1080 on a 4K TV will definitely look a little fuzzy.
Well, Dan, Yormi's not going to be here the whole time. He's like, I don't think I can watch this. We're not gonna have him out the whole time.
Oh, but maybe he wants to. No. Things could get a little weird because he really hasn't. We don't know how the cats will act around him, basically.
Yeah, pretty much.
So far, they haven't really cared at all. Like, here, like, Boban just comes over and is like, whatever. It's this tube you have in your hand.
Noodle with a head. YouTube
Oh,
is
well.
weird. Maybe it's just YouTube being weird.
I was gonna say we should start dual streaming again. For the longest time, we were dual streaming to YouTube and Twitch, and we stopped because we were having issues where YouTube was just going down. But then we stopped doing that, and YouTube still went down. So I don't know. YouTube, they need to work on their live streaming platform, I think.
I would agree
But
with that statement.
that being said, it's been pretty smooth lately, so maybe they did fix it. Who knows?
It's all right, bud.
Crystal clear then.
Oh, see, there we go. Who knows?
I do wish we could get better upload speeds where we live. So we only have cable and we only get like 20 up for our upload, but because we have the ability right now, we have a 4K web camera. I would love to be able to just stream in 4K. But internet doesn't play nice with that.
Not here, anyway.
But I guess the good thing is most of our content is audio only, so you can enjoy it no matter how fuzzy the screen is.
This
But
is true.
I am like that. If like a video's fuzzy, it annoys me. Has he got it now?
I mean, if I let him go, it's gonna drop, but...
Oh, so you said that you got sent the Hogwarts Legacy Common Room videos.
I did. Katie sent them to me. I have to watch them yet.
Oh, maybe we'll watch those later because they are very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we already know what Gryffindor's common room looks like, obviously.
I thought we saw Hufflepuff's, too.
Slytherins. Not in the movies. But Hufflepuff's common room looks like the Shire. It looks so amazing. I love it. Hufflepuffs are really just little hobbits. The hobbits of Hogwarts.
Boban scared him. Walking by.
Oh. Well, I mean, it's a big, vicious animal.
I don't blame him for being nervous. What does that guy in those videos say? When you're a noodle with a head, the world is a dangerous place. Or the world is a scary place, or something.
Nero, we basically just introduced our new pet, Yormi, here.
Yes.
Little world serpent. You can see him climbing right there.
Yep, he's just hanging out.
And that's kind of what we were talking about. And now we just brought up that Hogwarts Legacy released some trailers that show each of the common rooms. And for the first time, you get to see the Hufflepuff common room. And honestly, I think the Hufflepuff common room is probably the best common room. It really just looks like the Shire. Like the dorms have all these big round doors and stuff, plants everywhere.
Very cool. And you are right, Dan. Cats are predators. They would totally kill and eat a snake.
Mm-hmm. But hey, snakes also sometimes turn the tables on cats.
That's true. That's true. They have been known to do that.
But one of the reasons why we can't keep them out the whole stream.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it.
We don't want anything to happen to any of our animals because someone got uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I should have been a Huffledore. I mean, I am still down for the Slytherin common room with a nice view of the lake and the squid.
I mean, it does look cool.
Just saying. It's pretty rad.
But for the trailers, I liked it because we've seen Gryffindor, we've seen Slytherin pretty thoroughly.
Yeah.
We saw a little bit of Ravenclaw. We didn't see a lot. But now you get to see Hufflepuffs we never saw, and you get a better look at Ravenclaws.
That's true. I mean, Hufflepuff was the only common room no one ever went to in the books.
Exactly.
So that is true.
Ravenclaw is kind of... It's kind of a blue Gryffindor common room.
Yeah, I mean, it's in a relatively similar location. It's in one of the towers of the castle, you know.
Oh, no, don't go over there. I'll get your belly.
Are we turtling up, buddy? Are we getting nervous?
Maybe. He's got 2 cats flanking him now.
That's true. He does have a cat on either side. Should we put him away now?
Yeah, he looks nervous.
Bobans, I can't bet you right now. Alright. Come here, Mr. Means. But yes, everybody, this is our boy. We just wanted you to be able to say hello to him.
Introduce him to the world.
Yes.
But I mean, come on, Dan. How can you hate that face? Oh, now he's kind of hiding it, but...
See? There. Now everyone can see. Look at that nice boy face. Dan, avert your eyes if you have to. Isn't he cute, mans? He's such a nice boy. Alright, but...
I will agree with you there, Dan. Too bad it's not a kangaroo.
I also will agree.
I was disappointed it wasn't a kangaroo.
I know. Maybe someday I'll get to show off a kangaroo.
Only the second, Dan? Those are rookie numbers. Gotta pump those numbers up. I'm just kidding. I haven't even had one today. Dan said he's cracking open his second beer of the day. Oh yeah, you did, didn't you? Yeah, Lex got some drinks going too, so she's preparing for what may lay ahead with all the young dudes. Because we're getting close to the end, so, I mean, it's not much time for it to turn around if it's still going to be slacking. Oh, okay, you're good. 4 hours. What did happen the last time in all the young dudes? Let's see. Oh, this is the summer before Remus. We're going into the summer before Remus gets the job at Hogwarts. So we're going to find out how he got the job. And he's kind of hinting to Grant that he would definitely just kind of leave him and go back to Sirius if Sirius miraculously showed up and proved that he was innocent. Who would have guessed? We also found out that this story ends before Order of the Phoenix, so we're actually not going to get the whole Tonks Remus drama relationship. Yes, setting up for Grant to be bit by the werewolf and skip off with what was his name? Started with a C. Castor. I wanted to say like Cletus or something. That would not work. Cletus the wolf.
Give us a few months and Yormi will be wrapped around my neck and stuff when we streamed. He'll be such a sweet boy. Yeah, Grant got like pissed off last time because The way that Remus was talking, he was just like, really? Really? You're still not over him? We've been together for 10 years now.
Mm-hmm.
I've got to get the chapter up. So, yeah. Don't like snakes. Not everyone likes snakes.
No.
But it's okay. Maybe you just haven't met the right one yet. Yormi will break everyone's fears away.
I mean, snakes are very different from any animal that anyone else ever has, you know?
Yeah,
It's like dog and a cat. There's a lot of similar qualities. But then you go from like dog, cat, even like a rabbit or something to a snake. Now you have this smooth animal that feels cold. It's just a big long rope.
Oh, sorry. He said he doesn't like snapes, not snakes.
Oh,
my bad.
I thought someone commented after that.
OMFG, I'm gone. She's like... I'm assuming Angela doesn't like snakes either.
I guess.
Angela,
sorry.
Yeah, we put it away.
We put it away.
He's away. Wait, maybe one more little
sipperoo.
Trying to fortify myself for how bad this is gonna be.
You don't know that. This is the greatest Harry Potter fan fiction of all time. This is what Harry Potter should have been. This ending is going to be immaculate.
It could very well be very good. I'm hoping that this ending is so good that it will have been worth all the bullshit.
What did Shakespeare say? There's only 4 stories in the world and they're just rewritten.
Yeah, there's only 5 stories, but the possibilities are infinite.
Was it 5 stories?
4 or 5.
I thought it was 4. Either way, if it's 4, this is number 5. Breaks the mold.
I am chasing vodka with that Pepsi. Dan. That's what I am doing.
That's why I mean, it's like ring composition. It's gonna come full circle. It went from good to bad, and we're gonna come back around to good.
Let's hope so. Let's hope so. Should we start?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. Chapter 183. Summer, 1993. I stumbled out of bed. I got ready for the struggle. I smoked a cigarette, and I tightened up my gut. I said, this can't be mine, must be my double. And I can't forget, I can't forget, I can't forget, but I don't remember what. August 7th, 1993. An owl arrived that morning, and it was as if Remus had been waiting for it all along. He was brushing his teeth when the bird landed on his bathroom windowsill, brown and tawny. He recognized it at once. He would know a Hogwarts owl anywhere. It gave an official hoot and stuck out its scaly leg. Remus untied the letter, toothbrush clenched between his teeth, mouthful of froth. He spat and opened the envelope as the bird took off again, navigating the narrow brick buildings with the perfect ease of a predator. Mr. R.J. Lupin. Professor Dumbledore wishes to pay you a visit today at about tea time. He apologizes for the short notice given and hopes that he will be made welcome. No need to provide refreshments. Hoping you are well. It was not signed and had presumably come directly from the headmaster's office. Remus expected his insides to turn cold, his hands to shake, tears to prick in his eyes. But nothing came. He felt no reaction other than extreme tiredness. Heaving a sigh, Remus finished brushing his teeth and dressed. Grant had left at some point for football practice. He'd invited Remus. He always asked, but Remus never took him up on it. He'd spent enough of his life watching people who were sportier than him doing sporty things. It was a Saturday and there was not much to do, so Remus read the paper. The Guardian. He hadn't picked up a copy of The Prophet in years, and settled in to wait. He expected that tea time was about 5 p.m, though you could never tell with Dumbledore. He tried to picture his old head teacher, wondering whether 12 years had made much difference, and to see if he was still angry. But no, Remus didn't think he had the energy for anger anymore. Maybe he'd used it all up. Restless, Remus switched on the telly, then turned it off again when there was nothing to watch but Grandstand. He found himself growing agitated. What sort of person simply announced their visit the morning of? What sort of person just invited themselves over? No one but Dumbledore. It was downright rude. What if Remus had plans? He briefly wondered about teaching the old goat a lesson, walking out and going to see a film. Let Dumbledore arrive to an empty flat. Serve him right. But... Remus wanted to know. It had to be important. No one from Hogwarts or the Order had tried to get in touch since the early 80s. It could be anything. Finally, that old familiar crack sounded just outside, and there was a soft but purposeful rap at the door. He opened it quickly and found Dumbledore almost exactly as he remembered. Hair a bit whiter, if that was even possible, but very much the same man. A queasy feeling rose up in Remus's throat, and he felt 11 years old again. "Professor?" he said dryly, standing aside to allow Dumbledore entry. "Remus," the old man smiled. Oh, is that better?
There we go. Yeah, you'll have to go back, because I think when Lola stepped on the keyboard, she hit the mute. So yeah.
"Professor," he said dryly, standing aside to allow Dumbledore entry. "Remus," the old man smiled. "How are you?" "Fine." Remus rubbed the back of his head. "Fine, yeah." "Lovely." Dumbledore's bright blue eyes darted about the room, taking in every inch of the home Remus had once shared with Sirius. "Sit if you want," Remus offered. "Thank you." "Tea?" "Certainly, very kind." Remus took the opportunity to escape to the kitchen. He made the tea the Muggle way, with the electric kettle, just to stay away a bit longer. "Sugar?" he called. "3, if you please." The old man still had his sweet tooth then. Remus remembered the sherbet lemons with reluctant fondness. Tea made, he returned to the living room and set the mugs down on his battered old coffee table, using an old copy of Private Eye as a coaster. "It's been ages," Remus said, sitting in an armchair. 12 years. "I know." Remus flinched, irritated. Did Dumbledore really think he couldn't count away each passing year, every month? "You're keeping well?" "Well enough. I get by." "Do you know why I'm here?" the wizard asked. Remus shrugged. "Haven't the foggiest." Dumbledore sighed very softly, then set down his mug of tea. "I was somewhat afraid of that. You haven't been reading the news, then?" "Not your news, no. Why?" "Oh, dear. I had hoped you'd already... You see, Remus..." "He's dead, isn't he?" Remus said suddenly, sharply. "Black. He's dead." Dumbledore fixed him with a very intense stare. "No," he said gently. "He is not dead. Sirius has escaped." For a moment, Remus thought he'd misheard. Escaped. Would dead have been better? At least if Sirius was dead, then it was all over finally. He couldn't wrap his head round what escape meant. Christ. He dropped his head into his hands. "Indeed." Dumbledore sipped at his tea. Remus didn't trust himself to lift his mug, so he simply sat there, staring at the carpet. It needed hoovering badly. "I take it, then," Dumbledore said evenly, "that Mr. Black has not been in touch?" Mr. Black. He spoke as if they were still his students. Remus just shook his head mutely, looking up. Dumbledore nodded, and Remus knew he believed him. Is he... I didn't know anyone could escape Azkaban. Sirius would be the first, Dumbledore said. He was always a very gifted wizard. Remus couldn't think properly. He felt as if a vault of long-forgotten memories was easing open in his mind, its hinges rusty and sore. Could a dog escape the Dementors? Could a dog swim up the shore? The North Sea was so cold he shuddered to think about it. 12 years. Honey, I'm home! Grant clattered through the door in fluorescent yellow football shorts with a terrible American accent and a cheesy grin, which froze when he saw Dumbledore. Oh, sorry. Tea party, is it? Remus stood up anxiously, rubbing his arm. Grant, this is my old head teacher. Could you give us a minute? If you want. Grant furrowed his brow, eyes darting back and forth. Should I leave? No, don't go, just... I'll wait in the other room, Grant said, understanding quickly. Remus blushed slightly. Dumbledore was sure to know that the other room was the bedroom. Grant edged around the room awkwardly. Just as he reached the bedroom door, he patted his pockets. Remus, got any fags? Accio Marlboros, Remus said, with a twitch of his wand. The packet flew into his hand, and he withdrew one of his own, lighting it with his wand, then threw the box to Grant, who caught it deftly. Cheers, Grant nodded, retreating into the next room. Remus took a long drag, staring into space. His head swam. He rarely smoked anymore. He hid a box for emergencies, and this was an enormous emergency. You perform magic in front of this young man? Dumbledore asked. Remus gave him an irritated look. What a stupid thing to care about. Yeah, statute of secrecy, he replied, tutting, flicking his ash onto the coffee table. Give me detention for it if you like. He took another pull. Fortunately, the statute of secrecy does not apply to partners, spouses, or family members, Dumbledore replied calmly. And I assume he is your... Remus exhaled smoke, rubbing his head again. Well, he's not my fucking brother, Professor. Dumbledore did not flinch. I'm sorry, Remus, he said. You've had a shock. I hadn't realized you'd shut yourself off so much. I had thought... No one to shut myself off from, Remus snorted. Everyone's gone away. I wish I could give you some time to adjust to this news, but I'm afraid there is another reason I've come today. Of course there is. Remus sighed deeply. He just wanted Dumbledore to leave. He needed a drink for the first time in years. He needed to drink into a stupor to drown every thought in his head. Are you working at the moment? Here and there, Remus shrugged. What I can get. There is a vacancy at Hogwarts. Oh yeah, Remus snorted. Filch left, has he? Not interested. It is a teaching position, Dumbledore replied, once again demonstrating his uncanny ability to remain calm when confronted with barefaced cheek. Remus laughed rudely. Have you finally cracked, Dumbledore? You want to hire a werewolf to look after your kids now? There are measures we can take. Oh no! Remus shook his head vehemently. You're not getting me back in that bloody shack. Advances have been made, Remus, Dumbledore said sharply. If you had kept in touch with the wizarding world, you would know this. The discovery of Wolfsbane potion has been of enormous help to many with your condition. It would render you almost entirely harmless during your transformations. I would make it a condition of your employment. Why do you want me? Remus eyed him with renewed suspicion. What was he after? Teaching positions at Hogwarts were highly coveted, he knew that much. I think you would make an excellent teacher, first and foremost, Dumbledore said. I also thought you might appreciate the opportunity, and with the news of Black's escape, Remus nodded. You want me nearby, just in case. For your own protection, of course. He won't come after me, Remus said stonily. He might be mad, but he's not stupid.
He's never been stupid. Not stupid, perhaps, but reckless. Dumbledore raised a snowy eyebrow. Remus conceded. True enough. What would I be teaching? History? Care of magical creatures? Defense against the dark arts. Dumbledore smiled pleasantly, now that Remus seemed to be coming around to the idea. As an ex-member of the Order of the Phoenix, I thought you would be ideal. There is one other thing, Dumbledore said, sounding unsure for the first time, as though he wasn't certain what Remus's reaction might be. Remus said nothing, just looked him in the eye and waited. Dumbledore set down his mug. Harry. Pain fled somewhere deep inside Remus, like the reopening of an old wound. His mouth went dry again, and he sipped his lukewarm tea. I hadn't thought, he said quietly. I hadn't forgotten, but he'd be 12? 13 now. 13. He shook his head slowly. Is he... What's he like? He looks like James, Dumbledore said sadly. But there is a good deal of Lily in him too. Remus was quiet for almost a full moment before getting his breath under control. Finally he raised his head. Okay, he said. 1st of September, 1993. You're going then, Grant said. This was a redundant statement. Remus was literally packing his bags. He was getting the strangest sense of déjà vu. How long it had been since he'd last packed a trunk for Hogwarts. He'd had to dig out all of his school robes, his weird wizard clothes. They were shabby and threadbare, but he wasn't willing to fork out for new stuff, so he did his best with some mending spells. Grant had painted Professor R.J. Lupin on his old briefcase as a joke, but it didn't feel very funny at that moment. I'm going, he confirmed, rolling up a pair of socks. Grant sat on the bed, watching him, stony-faced. Remus didn't blame him. He was being unspeakably cruel, he knew that. And Grant was putting up with it, yet again. Remus looked at him. It's a job. It's only for a year. At your old school? Yes, I've told you. I'm worried about you. I know you are. If Sirius has escaped and he knows you're there, will he... Can we not? I'm going and that's it, Remus snapped, clicking his suitcase shut fiercely. He didn't want to think about that. He just needed to get through today. They were silent for a bit then. Grant went and made tea, brought it back in. Remus stopped to sit and drink it with him. He'd given up smoking, for good this time, or so he told himself. Tea would have to do. You can still stay here, I'm not kicking you out, Remus said. This place is as much yours as it is mine, and there are protection spells, I made sure. Nah, Grant shrugged, giving a defeated smile. I'm rubbish on me own. Probably do the rounds or board at the Borstal. Been a while since I've seen the Brighton lot. Maybe I'll pop down. Stay in touch, okay? I'm not about to cart an owl round with me. I suppose not. I'll try to get to a phone if I can. God, you make it sound like you're off to war. Remus swallowed dryly and found he couldn't speak. Fortunately, Grant didn't have speaking in mind just then. He took Remus's tea from him, set it down on the bedside table, then turned around to push Remus down into the mattress. I'm gonna miss you, he smiled against Remus's lips, working the button on his trousers. Remus kissed him back as hard as they had when they were teenagers. Afterwards, Remus decided it was best to leave quickly. He wanted to think about Grant lying happy and flushed under the duvet, an enduring memory of youth and beauty. He dressed and picked up his bags. Just as he was about to say goodbye again, Grant grabbed his wrist. Oi! I love you, you tosser. Grant. Go on. Grant looked at him directly, his face just as honest and sunny as it had been at 16. Say it back. You know how I feel about you. Yeah. Grant smiled without a trace of bitterness. I do. But it'd be nice to hear it. Go on. I know you can. Terror gripped Remus's heart, but he swallowed it. He had to be brave. Grant deserved it. And he meant it. He did. He did. I love you, Cheers. Grant let go of his wrist, and that was all. We will see each other again, Remus said forcefully, promising it to himself as much as anything. Grant stretched out sleepily and nodded. Yeah, I know, he sighed. Like magnets, you and me. Always snap back together again. Remus hurried out the door, not wanting to get too upset. He had a train to catch.
Oh boy, what's gonna happen in this next chapter? Just gonna go back. Yeah, remember how I said I loved you? Well, I don't love you as much as I love the fair wrists of, I was gonna say Snape, Sirius Black. Maybe Snape. I mean, he does have those skinny wrists.
He's so rude to Dumbledore.
Yeah.
I don't get that. I don't ever get that vibe between Lupin and Dumbledore.
No, it's supposed to be Lupin respects the crap out of Dumbledore.
Yeah, and he's like eternally grateful to Dumbledore for letting him go to school and all that stuff. It's not remotely what it's been in this story. I just really don't like how rude he is to Dumbledore.
That's right. Don't you be mean to my man. Dumbledore's doing his best.
Right?
He's got a lot on his plate right now.
For
Stressing
real.
out.
He just officially found out that Voldemort has Horcruxes, and now you're giving him shit.
The only thing is, maybe I missed it. He didn't tell him that the position was cursed, though.
No, he didn't. He left that part out. Yeah,
Maybe he deserves a little rudeness. That was kind of rude.
That was a little bit of a mean thing.
I mean, and we know that kind of happened in the book. Unless maybe he told Remus that, hey, it's cursed, and Remus was just like, okay, so I'll just quit at the end of the year. What's the worst that could happen? The whole school finds out I'm a werewolf? Psh. Come on.
Right.
Actually, Snape.
Turn to page 394.
Snape up here. Hold my potion. I'm about to ruin this man's entire career.
Yep.
Uh,
How do you think that morning felt for Snape after he did that? Do you think he skipped down the hallway to the dungeons after that?
oh yeah.
He had a great day that day.
He was like Mr. Rogers walking into the common room. Oh, kids, I have some news.
There's Bobans.
There is.
She's preventing me from getting the next chapter out.
You're right. Oh, she is actually sitting on... Okay, never mind. She is actually sitting on your phone.
She is. What the Bobans? What the Bobans?
Right? Oh, man, it would have been so great to have that interaction. This is one of those times where I get you... It's a huge challenge to, like, rewrite something that's already been told, but could have had a lot of fun with it.
Him losing it with Fudge would have been such gold. That's
Right.
one of my favorite parts in Azkaban, where he just absolutely loses his shit in front of everyone. And then afterwards, Dumbledore is just like, don't worry about him, Minister. He has just suffered a great disappointment. Like, oh, it's such a good moment in the books. He's so angry. Oh, it's so great.
In my mind, I kind of pictured him as Yosemite Sam. When
Just,
he
like,
freaks
freaks
out.
out.
He's incomprehensible, just...
Yeah, Alan Rickman would have been able to pull it off, too. He would have done it.
It would have been so great.
It would have been so great.
Hey,
Hi, Mike.
No worries. How have you been?
How's Lucille Ball doing? I did read a headcanon where somebody said Sirius sees a cat on the Hogwarts grounds, and he turns into a dog, and he goes up to it to like try to chase it away, and the cat like smacks him on the nose and scares him, and he runs back like tail between his legs, and then later it's just McGonagall, and she pops back from being a cat, and she's just like, stupid kids.
That's actually pretty great.
Don't bite me, Boba.
I mean, if McGonagall would be any of our cats, it would probably be Lola. Don't let this sweet kitty persona fool you. All of our animals are absolutely terrified of her. Like,
Yes.
Bailey does not, like, mess with her.
Nope.
If she is anywhere, if she's, like, on a chair, anywhere, and the cats jump up and see her, they leave.
Yep.
They do not want anything to do with her.
No. They're terrified of Lola.
She is very pretty.
She is a very pretty girl.
And I think that's why it's so funny. She's such this dainty looking cat. And she's probably the sweetest cat I've ever known. But she's also the fiercest.
Mm-hmm. Lola is a Lynx Point Siamese.
So she is like a white and gray.
Yeah, she's white and gray. She's got all these stripes on her tail. These dark stripes on her tail. Sorry, Doda.
And then her belly is all white.
Her belly is all white. Her eyes are blue.
Oh, she's like, I thought she would stand up all the way.
We have 4 cats. Right, the Bobans? We have 4 cats for the Bobans. Yes. Yes, the Bobans. Shall we read the next chapter?
Oh, wine with McGonagall would be great. McGonagall, you bring the biscuits. I got the alcohol. Let's do it.
Hell yeah.
McGonagall and Dumbledore has to be there too.
Absolutely. Dumbledore's got to be great. Swifty. Are you kidding?
Honestly, just going out to the bar with the Order of the Phoenix.
Going out to the bar with Hagrid, McGonagall, and Dumbledore. That group.
And
Slughorn.
Arthur.
Slughorn.
Slughorn.
Slughorn would know how to... Shall we just go on?
And also, hello, Maddie. Welcome.
Oh, hello, Maddie. Yes, hello.
Oh, and Flitwick. Flitwick would be great. That's why I mean, the Order of the Phoenix. Everyone has to go.
Did Maddie miss a great chapter?
She missed a chapter.
You missed a chapter with Remus being rude as shit to Dumbledore, so I don't know how you would feel about that.
That's true. That's true. We will get Harry, or at least
talking about Harry. Yeah.
Because I think we jump over the year to the next summer. Because this author doesn't like to rewrite what's been written.
Yeah, this is, as summary says, this is very, very hard to write, so I hope you can forgive me by how all over it is. As I said, I have absolutely no desire to rehash scenes from the book, so this is as close as we'll get. So here we go. Chapter 184. Summer, 1994.
I just thought how funny it would be if Harry, Ron, Hermione are there. Peter Pettigrew is, caught. Remus and Sirius are just there and just go in and just start making out. How awkward that would be.
If you could return, don't let it burn, don't let it fade. I'm sure I'm not being rude, but it's just your attitude. It's tearing me apart, it's ruining every day I swore I'd be true and fellow, so did you. Were you lying all the time? Was it just a game to you?
You did that on purpose. thought you sounded like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star last time, so now you're like, I'll show you Twinkle Twinkle. About to twinkle twinkle all over this song.
Twinkle like Dumbledore's blue eyes. For the first week or so after Remus returned from Hogwarts, he didn't know how to feel. For the first time in a very long time, Remus was lost, untethered, drifting. He wandered around the flat like a ghost, going through the movements of everyday life, but feeling nothing. It wasn't depression. He knew what depression felt like. "It's shock," said Grant. "Oh," said Remus, staring blankly at the TV. Obviously, he'd expected Hogwarts to stir up old memories. He'd known from the start that revisiting the place could easily ruin him, but he'd done it anyway. Maybe he was a masochist. Maybe he was just stupid. The castle was filled with ghosts from Remus's past, which was a deeply unsettling experience after spending the better part of a decade trying to forget it all. The moment he'd arrived at King's Cross, it all came flooding back. The poky little train carriages with the worn-out upholstery, the trolley witch, chocolate frogs, the bustle and noise of students embarking on a new term. With the full moon ahead of him, he'd squirreled away in a compartment and promptly fallen asleep. Until the carriage turned cold, and the Dementors... No. Anyway, ghosts. McGonagall was perhaps the strangest. She must have known he would be coming, but their first meeting had hit Remus harder than expected, and she'd seemed just as surprised as him. They weren't quite sure how to relate to each other now. "Mr. Lupin! Oh, I'm sorry, Professor Lupin!" "Hello, Minerva, please." She smiled gracefully. She reached out and squeezed his arm. She was every bit as formidable as she had been 20 years ago, only a little greyer at the temples. But then so was he. "It's wonderful to see you, Remus," she said earnestly. "It's good to be back," he lied. Her eyes were soft and kind, as if she could see right through him. "My office is always open, if you need anything, as ever." He appreciated the gesture, but didn't prevail upon her very often, largely because he wanted to keep to himself. He also wanted to stay away from Gryffindor Tower if he could. The rest of the school was familiar. The lush, expansive grounds, the secretive forest, the food, the portraits, the staircases he had mapped so carefully. But Gryffindor Tower, the most intimate and happy space of his adolescence, that would be almost too much to recover from. He was put in mind of Homer once again, the word nostalgia, which meant a painful homecoming. That was exactly how it felt. He didn't socialize much with his peers. The staff knew, by and large, about his lycanthropy, but he still preferred to avoid any unpleasant conversations if he could. Were they tutting behind his back? Were they wondering about him? "No one's seen him for years. He was Black and Potter's closest friend. What does he know? What did he do?" Funnily enough, Professor Binns had forgotten Remus, but at least Flitwick hadn't. He was very kind, inviting Remus to stop by the Charms classroom for tea and toast a few times. Remus did to be polite, but found it difficult to forget all the times he and Sirius had locked themselves inside the kindly professor's classroom. He generally found it very hard to reconcile his adult self, responsible for lesson plans and marking essays and the welfare of students, with his reckless teenage self, wild and arrogant and madly in love. There were entire wings of the castle he actively avoided for this very reason. He barely left his classroom and chambers except for meals in the Great Hall, and he never went to Hogsmeade, except to quickly pass through on the way to the old phone box just outside the village, and thank God that was still there. "How is it?" Grant asked the first time Remus called. "Awful. Bearable. I suppose, like teaching, the kids are okay. Actually, the kids are great." "Well, just focus on that. First time I went into a remand home after St. Edmund's, I thought I was going to have to quit. I swear those places all smell the same. Anyway, you can get past it if you remember it's about the kids, not you. Be the teacher you wish you had." This was good advice, and Remus did his very best. He hadn't had much experience with young people, but he very clearly remembered being a young person himself. He tried to organise lessons he would have found interesting, bring in magical creatures whenever he could, like Ferox had, and giving extra tips and pointers wherever students were struggling. Really, it wasn't too difficult from the study lessons he'd held back when he was in school. Equally, Remus tried to pay attention to all of his students and learn their characters, their individual needs. That was incredibly weird at first. He found no less than 5 Weasleys to teach, one in almost every year. Then there was poor little Neville Longbottom, awkward and nervous and twitchy. Narcissa's son was in another class, the spitting image of Lucius. And then, of course, there was... Anyway, aside from Flitwick and McGonagall, the rest of the staff were virtual strangers to Remus, except, of course, for the potions master. Remus had really wanted to stay out of Snape's way, but from the very first day it was clear that that was not going to be easy. It was a full moon, and of course Snape was the only one who knew how to brew Wolfsbane potion, the prick. He probably learned how to do it just to torment Remus. It was bad enough they had to share a castle again, but Snape was hell-bent on making sure Remus felt his displeasure at the arrangement. "Lupin," he said haughtily at their first meeting, just before the welcome feast. "I was surprised to hear you'd survived the war." His lips curled. "But it seems so many of your friends did not." As foul as Snape was, it did bring out something Remus hadn't properly felt in years. Mischief. "Severus," he said warmly. "And I was surprised to hear you survived the trials, when so many of your friends did not." Snape sneered, and that set the tone for the year. Severus had clearly not forgotten the events of their 5th year. He was as despicable as Remus remembered him, and had not aged well. His hair still hung lank and greasy, perhaps a little further back than before. His black eyes were more sunken, and his nose was more beak-like. He made Remus's skin crawl, but there was nothing to be done about it. They had to meet privately each month for the potion. The potion itself was utterly vile, and Remus resented it bitterly. It tasted awful, but worse than that was the effect it had. "Are you really gonna start drama?" She wants to get her.
Yeah. You can't get over there.
No,
Right.
she can't.
The 2 Flitwick. Wait, was there 2 Professor Flitwicks? I don't remember
No.
that from the movie.
No, it's the same guy. They just did his costume differently.
Oh, okay.
They just changed his costume.
She's so angry right now.
I know, Lola is so PO'd. Oh, God. He still transformed, still suffered the agonies as his skull elongated and his black back split open and his tendons creaked, but he fully retained his human mind afterwards. This was utterly horrible. Remus had come to see the monthly retreat into his animal brain as something of a catharsis, but having an animal body and human thoughts turned out to be very unpleasant indeed. He felt neither here nor there, trapped in the wrong form and unable to escape. He curled up to sleep, locked inside his office, every month full of self-loathing. In the mornings after, he would limp to Madame Pomfrey's office to ask for Murtlap essence. Of everyone from Remus's childhood, Pomfrey seemed the most pleased to see him again. She had aged like everyone else, but had retained her gentle touch, her sweet face, and her no-nonsense attitude to Remus's well-being. "Remus!" She reached up to hug him for the very first moment she saw him. "Just look at you, giant of a man!" Madam, Poppy." "As polite as ever," she smiled. Come and tell me what you've been doing with yourself." They had a few very pleasant catch-ups in her office by the fireplace. She wanted to know everything about his transformation since Hogwarts, and he told her as much as he could. She was interested to hear about the pack, and how they were able to heal each other by sharing group magic. "I tried to get in touch with you after the Potters died," she said sadly, "but no one would tell me where you were living, and I didn't dare ask too much in case." Remus looked away, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," he said. "I wanted to be left alone." "Yes, well, you were the same as a boy. Stubborn," she smiled fondly. He smiled back, realizing how much he'd missed her. For the first month or so, Remus's nerves were raw. He hesitated as he turned every corner, worried that he might be seeing something painful. But as pain often does, this lessened over time. He slipped into a new character. Not the teenage Remus who took risks without thinking, who was desperate to prove himself, and not the half-muggle, half-broken man he'd been in London. Somewhere between these two warring halves, he became Professor Lupin, restrained and serious, offering encouragement wherever he could. And this was all just as well, because that was exactly who he needed to be. For Harry. God. Harry. Harry Potter was James and Lily seamlessly combined, all charm and cheek and strength and goodness. Remus had been worried, knowing that the kid's childhood had been far from ideal, that Harry would be difficult. Remus well remembered his own spiky temperament at 13. Cruel adults make bitter children. But no. Harry was as kind-hearted and open-minded as his parents, full of love and so generous with it. Getting to know him had been painful and joyful all at once. The first time they met, Remus thought he was still dreaming. He woke up on the train, clawed awake by Dementors, those fucking abominations. He cleared the threat and stared around at the faces of the frightened kids, found Harry, passed out on the floor. Until he opened his eyes, he was James. Nothing could convince Remus otherwise. A bit skinnier, maybe shorter than Prongs had been at 13, but otherwise the spitting image. Of course, Harry had no idea who Remus was, and for as long as possible it stayed that way. How could he explain? Even after a few conversations with the boy, Remus was completely at sea. So he let Harry lead the way, and answered the questions which had suitable answers. When Harry came to him asking for Patronus lessons so that he could keep playing Quidditch, Remus couldn't say no. It was exactly what James would do too. And when Sirius came up, he sidestepped it. Harry already knew that Black and James had been friends, and Remus wasn't sure that he could what more he could say without losing the kid's trust. "Yes, Harry, your dad was my best friend, but Sirius Black was my everything." No, it wouldn't do. What was more, Remus wasn't sure whether the Wizarding World had its own version of Section 28. If he started confessing stuff like that, could he get in trouble for corrupting young minds? It was bad enough he was a werewolf. By that time, it was already clear that Sirius was nearby. When the convict broke into the castle on Halloween night, Remus almost walked straight off the grounds and apparated back to London. Maybe he would have if the perimeter weren't swarming with Dementors, and of course the fact that Black was definitely after Harry. That made Remus furious. Hadn't Sirius done enough damage? He must have really lost his mind. He must have strayed so far from the young man who'd cradled baby Harry in his arms with tenderness and awe. Remus used this as a reminder to steel himself. It was no use mourning Sirius. His Sirius had died many years ago. And then that night happened. In a matter of hours, everything changed. Fuck. Maybe Grant was right. Maybe it was shock. After being given his marching orders from Hogwarts, thank God, another year might have killed him, Remus took the night bus back to London, his mind churning over everything he'd learnt. Events kept shifting and reordering themselves. Some things became clearer, others muddied by various versions of the truth. The things Sirius had said, the excuses Wormtail had snivelled, and everything Remus thought he'd known. None of these accounts lined up quite right. The only thing Remus was certain of was that for 12 years, he'd hated the wrong person. "Please come back," he wailed down the phone to Grant once he was home. "Please, please." "I'm on my way," Grant said, and hung up immediately. It still took hours. Remus changed into his muggle clothes, throwing Professor Lupin's shabby robes in a corner of the bathroom, and paced the flat while he waited, cursing the slowness of muggle transport. He didn't drink. He wanted a clear head. He wanted to understand. "Remus!" Grant burst into the living room, tired and dishevelled. He'd had a haircut in the past year. It was so short it barely curled anymore. Remus hated it, but said nothing, just ran to hug him. "What happened?" Grant asked, huffing as Remus knocked the air out of him, but squeezing him back reassuringly. He didn't look the same, but he smelled the same, and that helped. That was grounding. "He was innocent," Remus babbled, still clinging on. "It was Peter all along. It was never him. I'm such an idiot."
Oh, you said there was one from Grant's perspective, so it's the epilogue. So we will definitely read that.
The epilogue? All right, will do. "Remus, I don't know what you're talking about, please. Let's just sit down, shall we? Christ, you're skinny. Don't they feed you at that school?" Remus allowed Grant to take over. He sat obediently on the couch, accepted a glass of water and a cigarette, because apparently Grant was smoking again, and the temptation was too much. The flat felt bare and stuffy, having sat empty for most of the year, and Grant opened the living room window, letting in the everyday sounds of foot traffic and pigeons. "Okay," Grant said, sitting opposite Remus, clasping his hands together in a very teacherly sort of way. "Let's start at the beginning, shall we?" Remus nodded. He was determined to speak. If anyone could sort all of this out, it was Grant. He was sure of it. "Sirius," he said. "I saw Sirius and Peter." "Wait," Grant frowned. "Peter? I thought he—" "No," Remus said darkly, his insides churning with hot rage. "He's alive. He's been hiding all these years." "From Sirius?" "From everyone. He did it. He betrayed Lily and James. It was never Sirius." "How?" Grant shook his head, clearly confused. "So he was in prison all this time for something that Peter did?" "Jesus." "Okay. You're sure? He's the one who told you?" "Yes, but I know for sure. I saw Peter and I—" Remus faltered. "I just believe Sirius, okay?" The fact was that he had read Sirius's mind, and he was still trying to get his head around that. He tried to piece the events of the night together for Grant's benefit and his own. "It was all Harry, James's son. He left the school one night and I knew why, so I followed him. I was worried Sirius would try to... But then Peter was there. I saw him, and I didn't know what to think." Something deep inside him had known at once, the second he saw Wormtail's name appear on the map, but he'd had to find out, had to know for sure. And then he'd got to the shack, and there was Sirius, skin and bones and rags and madness, cackling on the floor. Harry standing over him, poised with his wand. The wolf part of Remus took over, recognizing that Padfoot was in danger, and he disarmed everyone at once. "Where is he, Sirius?" Then he saw the rat, and it all fell into place. His mind went back, rushing back to 1981. All the secrecy, the mistrust, the lies. He looked at Sirius properly. He widened his eyes, and, almost without trying, he entered Sirius's thoughts. "Show me," he commanded, using the same magic the werewolves used. Sirius's brain was half canine by that point, and maybe that's why it worked. Black resisted for a moment, no doubt recalling Walpurga's forced intrusions, but he nodded and let Remus in. "But Padfoot!" James's voice echoing from a distant past. "I thought we agreed." "I know, but this is better, can't you see? No one will ever suspect Wormy." "Like a double bluff," Lily chimed in. "It's brilliant." Remus didn't need to hear any more. He lowered the wands and helped Sirius up and embraced him tightly. "I'm sorry," he communicated wordlessly. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Back in the flat, tears pricked in Remus's eyes, and Grant pulled out a hanky, handing it to him. "So is he free now, Sirius?" "No," Remus shook his head, collecting himself. "It got complicated and it was a full moon. I only saw him for 20 minutes maybe, and then I turned and so much happened without me. Peter ran away, they didn't catch him. I should have killed him when I had the chance. I wanted to, I was going to, but Harry stopped me." Grant paled, his mouth a grim line. He didn't say anything, though. "By the time it was morning, Sirius had escaped again too," Remus continued. "He's in hiding, and I don't know if I'll ever see him again." He wiped his eyes and ran his fingers through his hair. "Fuck, all this time, and I believed it! How could I have been so stupid?" "Hey, stop it!" Grant frowned, reaching out. Remus stood up abruptly, ignoring Grant and pacing the room once more, muttering to himself. "I should have known he would have never hurt James. I shouldn't have been so bloody gullible, so weak. I should have tried to see him. I could have got him out of there. I could have tracked down Peter. I could have—" "Remus!" Grant raised his voice. "Stop it!" Remus looked at him. "I don't know what to do," he said. Grant sighed. "Me neither, mate." He rubbed a hand over his face and Remus saw the rings under his eyes. Grant stood up. But there's nothing you can do right this second. So, I'm going to have a shower, right? Then we'll get dinner. Then we'll talk a bit more. Remus nodded eagerly. Yes, this is what he needed. A plan. Clear defined next steps. Grant left the room warily. Remus waited, listening to the water running, trying once again to get his thoughts in order. He did something he hadn't done since he was a teenager. He made a list. So, Mooney, he said to himself, what are the facts? 1. Sirius Black did not murder James and Lily Potter. 2. Peter Pettigrew was alive. 3. Peter Pettigrew had been a spy. 4. Peter Pettigrew murdered James and Lily Potter. 5. Sirius Black had been in prison for 12 years for a crime he was innocent of. A surge of anger washed over him once more. He had believed it. He was as guilty as Dumbledore, as anyone else who had simply assumed Sirius was the spy because Sirius was a Black. In fact, Remus had been more at fault because he ought to have known. No one was closer to Sirius than he was. Those last few months of the war were such a blur. Hadn't there been something wrong? Hadn't Sirius been distant, cold with him? In the years past, Remus had taken that as proof of Padfoot's betrayal. But now, with a sick feeling, he saw it for what it was. He thought I was the spy, he said to Grant the second he was out of the bathroom. Oi! Grant frowned, trying to get past Remus, wrapped in a towel. Spy? What? Oh, let me get dressed, come on. Remus followed him into the bedroom and sat on the bed, talking fast as Grant dried himself and put on clean clothes. During the war, we knew there was a spy. We knew someone was passing information to the other side, but no one knew who it was. Afterwards, we thought it was Sirius. It all made sense. He was caught blowing up a street full of muggles and... Do you have to call normal people that? Sorry, anyway, Sirius was the secret keeper for James and Lily. That means he had this spell on him, so only he knew who they were, to keep them safe. But he switched with Peter at last minute, and now we know that Peter was the spy. And they didn't tell me about the switch. Sirius didn't tell me because he must have thought... He didn't trust you, Grant said bluntly. Dressed, he sat down on the bed too, at a distance from Remus. I suppose I can't blame him. Have you broken his trust before? Grant raised an eyebrow. No. Did you think he was a spy before James and Lily died? No, never. Well then, Grant stood up. I'm going to nip down the shop. We need milk and bread, toothpaste. Wait, no, what do you mean, well then? Nothing. Look, come on, come to the shop with me. Then I promise we'll talk about it. I'll listen to you all night long if you want, I swear. I just need to get some food in you first. Remus went along with that. He watched Grant cook and he swallowed every mouthful, and then he talked, and he talked, and he talked. But it was no good. It came to nothing in the end. If Sirius is in hiding and Peter's on the run, Grant said, yawning. He'll go straight to Voldemort, the rat, Remus growled. Right then, Grant waved a hand. If Sirius is in hiding, then you can't do nothing. Sounds like it's out of your hands. Maybe I could send an owl, only that might give away his location. And then you'll get arrested or sent to Alcatraz or whatever it is for colluding with a criminal, Grant said with an air of finality. I just want to help him, Remus said. Course you do, but I don't see how. They sat in silence for a while thinking. It was dark outside. Remus didn't know what time it was, but it had to be pretty late. Grant looked exhausted and Remus felt a small twinge of guilt on top of everything else. Sorry to put you through all of this, he said quietly, reaching for Grant's hand. It's not really fair of me. It's fine. Grant gave him a small smile, stroking Remus's knuckles with his thumb. I do understand. It's just a lot. I know. How was it, seeing him? I mean, how did it make you feel? Remus shifted awkwardly. There it was, the thought he'd been avoiding. Because if Sirius was innocent, if he'd never betrayed James, then he'd never betrayed Remus either. And Remus didn't know what that meant to him now, after so much time. We're both so different now, he said, aware Grant was holding his breath while he waited for the response. I barely recognized him, really. I just felt sorry for him. The flutter in his stomach told him he was lying. Grant moved over and kissed him. Everything will be all right in the end.
Yeah, he's gonna leave Grant.
It's already there.
Definitely. Yeah.
It's
I think
already
Grant
there.
knows too.
Grant knows. Yeah, Grant definitely knows.
Yeah, Anna. Grant is trying not to get dumped. But I think he coming to the realization. Also, Remus says that he never betrayed Sirius's trust. I'm pretty sure there were a few times that he betrayed Sirius's trust.
How about all that time he spent with those effing werewolves?
Yeah. Or that night with Grant.
Where Sirius walked in on him?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, Remus is lying a little bit.
Yeah, exactly, Maddie. Why would Sirius trust him? Sirius knows he literally lies about everything all the time.
Exactly.
And keeps everything to himself.
Hello, Marcelo.
Yeah, Chris. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and Chris. I forgot about Chris. I wonder how that guy's doing. Did he just come back to like be in those 2 chapters and now we're not gonna
Probably.
get any
Probably.
like conclusion on him?
Just to show that there's a closeted gay wizard out there, I guess.
Maybe, I guess. Oh, and what did Grant mean by normal people?
I think he's just
Saying
offended.
wizards aren't normal people. I don't know.
Apparently not.
Maybe Remus is right. Maybe Grant isn't good for him. Just kidding. I love Grant.
Or when he promised Sirius that he wouldn't go looking for the wolves and then he met Livia alone. Yeah, there's a million reasons why Sirius should not trust Remus. Come on now.
But that doesn't matter. And I mean, didn't he say like he didn't know why he didn't talk to Sirius about it before? But if he just got home, didn't all of that stuff happen like maybe a week ago?
No, it says August 1990.
Oh, was it
Yeah,
August?
did it just say summer?
Because, yeah, it said that he just took the night bus home, and he just got home.
It just says summer.
Yeah.
So it could be like literally.
Because I'm pretty sure he like leaves Hogwarts 2 days later.
He does, because it happens, and then the night after it happens, Snape tells on him.
Yeah.
And
but
then
the semester was almost over anyways.
the semester was over.
Yeah. Oh,
it was the
over?
last. It was like the last day of school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Either way. It was an interesting chapter. Definitely would have liked to hear more about like the full year though. Everything good?
Yeah, I just got a text about Boomer.
Oh. You doing alright?
He's doing good, but apparently he was very pushy this afternoon. So I have to just kind of pay attention to him tomorrow.
Gotcha.
He wouldn't let anyone in on his side. He was being very aggy, I guess.
Oh, okay.
Probably just had enough.
Yes, Maddie?
Oh, sorry, Dan. I read the chapter titles at the very beginning. They say summer 1993. Maybe I just read them too fast.
Yeah.
Oh, Tom was asking what our names were. Maddie was answering Tom what our names are.
Oh, okay.
That's what that is.
Which are our internet names if you want to know our real names. My name's actually Evan and Alexis.
Yep.
But yeah, that chapter did jump out around a lot.
Yeah,
So.
there was a lot. Well, she said there's a lot of. She was saying this chapter was really hard to write. It was kind of messy.
Mm.
So.
Oh yeah, Dan, I get it. I mean, yeah, it didn't really jump around the year. It just jumped a year. We got first day of school and last day of school, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. The summer right before and then the summer right after. That was it.
So we gonna...
Yep, we're gonna read the next one right now.
Okay. How many... What is chapter is this?
185.
185. 3 more chapters after this.
Mm-hmm. Here we go.
Wait, is that 3 more chapters with the epilogue, or is the epilogue separate?
I think the epilogue is separate, because there's a Grant chapter after this, I think.
Okay. 4 chapters to go.
Yep. Here we go. Chapter 185. Early Summer, 1995. We passed upon the stair. We spoke of was and when, although I wasn't there. He said I was his friend, which came as some surprise. I spoke into his eyes. I thought you died alone a long, long time ago.
You were on a nursery rhyme kick.
Saturday, 24th of June, 1995. That fucking phoenix arrived first, and Remus knew at once. What the bloody hell is that? Grant leapt up, startled by the silvery bird, which burst into their living room. They'd been watching telly with all the windows open to counteract the summer heat. Remus had just been about to put the kettle on. The bird sat on top of their boxy little TV and opened its beak, speaking in Dumbledore's voice. Hadfoot is on his way. Remus nearly dropped the empty mugs he was holding. Fuck. What? Grant said, watching the bird vanish into thin air. Who's Padfoot? Fuck, Remus said again, setting down the mugs. He'd begun to shake uncontrollably. He felt cold all over. I don't think I can, he mumbled to himself, covering his mouth. Remus? Grant stood up and touched his shoulder. You're scaring me. Sirius, he spluttered. Sirius is Padfoot. Bloody hell, the murderer. Not a murderer, I told you. Right, sorry, coming here? It's his flat, after all. Oh, I forgot, Grant said flatly. He bit his lip. Should I go? No! Remus clung to Grant suddenly. No, please don't. I can't be alone. Don't leave me alone with... Okay, Grant soothed him, hugging him back. Calm down, all right? I won't go anywhere if you don't want. Just try to get yourself back together. I'm sorry. Remus took a deep breath. He knew he was acting childishly. This was no time to fall apart. He'd had years and years of that. If Dumbledore was sending Sirius to him, then something had happened. Something important. Now was the time for strength and action. He gazed about blindly for something to do. This place is a mess. I should start cleaning. He won't be long. Grant was helpless to do anything but watch as Remus ran round the flat like a headless chicken, using every cleaning charm he could remember, combined with some actual manual labour when he mucked up the spells. He couldn't stop moving. He couldn't bear to sit still for a moment, because then he might have to think. Within the hour there was a scratching noise at the door, and a low, gruff bark. Remus froze. A scent he'd not known in many years reared something in his subconscious. Was that a dog? Grant said nervously from the kitchen. You know I hate dogs. It's him, Remus breathed. He walked shakily to the door and pulled it open. There was Padfoot. Scrawny, mangy, fur slightly greying in places. But it was him. Come in, Remus said hoarsely. The dog huffed, bobbing its head, and entered. Remus clicked the door shut and leaned against it, watching as Sirius transformed back into himself. Scrawny, mangy, greying in places. His eyes,
Those dark blue eyes that had broken Remus's heart 1,000 times as a teenager had turned dull gunmetal grey. He was a bag of bones, unsettled all over. It was to be expected. "I've come straight from Hogwarts," he said. His voice was as hard and rasping as it had been last summer. "Yes," Remus rubbed the back of his head. "Dumbledore sent a message ahead." Sirius twitched slightly and nodded. "Something happened at the tournament. Harry was kidnapped." "What? Is he your—" "He came back. He's fine. Fine as can be expected. Voldemort's back too." "What?" "It's true. Harry faced him." "No." Remus felt sick. "The Order's reforming. Dumbledore told me to come here. Lie low." "Right," Remus nodded, still taking in the shock. "If that's—" Sirius's face softened. He looked younger, more like the real Sirius. "If you don't mind. I just followed orders without thinking, but I could go somewhere else if—" "No!" Remus said very firmly, snapping out of the confusion that had gripped him ever since Dumbledore's Patronus had appeared. He put a hand on Sirius's shoulder. Oh, he was so thin. "Of course you can stay here. It's your home." Sirius looked so relieved that Remus wanted to pull him close and wrap his arms round him, but he didn't. He looked at Grant, who was watching warily from the kitchen doorway. Sirius followed his eyeline and gave a start. "You're here." It wasn't a question, just a statement of fact. Grant, God love him, gave his breeziest smile. "All right, mate. Tell you what, you look like you could do with a Chinese. I'll pop out, shall I, Remus?" "You don't have to." "I think I do," Grant smiled. He grabbed his wallet from the coffee table on his way out. He didn't kiss Remus on the cheek as he usually might, but gave him a pat on the shoulder and said, "I'll be half an hour." He closed the door softly behind himself. Sirius and Remus stood in silence for what felt like minutes. Sirius frowned, making deeper lines appear in his face. "That was rude of me. I didn't mean to be rude." He began to scratch the back of his hand, anxiously, his fingernails long and black with grime. Remus felt a sorrowful tug deep in his stomach and reached out to still him. "How about a shower, then a sit-down? Everything's okay." Sirius looked up at him. Remus had forgotten how much smaller he was. "Sounds good." Sirius nodded weakly. Remus showed him into the bathroom, which was silly, because obviously he knew where the bathroom was. Nothing had changed in 13 years. While Sirius was washing, Remus went to the bedroom to find some clean clothes. He pulled a few shirts out of the drawer. He wanted to give Sirius his things to wear, not Grant's, because after all this time, Remus didn't honestly know which belonged to who. He settled on an oversized knitted jumper, which was definitely his. It would swamp Sirius, but it would be comfortable. Digging out a pair of tartan pajama bottoms to go with it, he laid them carefully on the bed. There was only one bed in the flat. There had only ever been one bed, and they had only ever needed one bed. The problem of where to put Sirius was unanswerable. Remus was still staring down at the clothes when he heard the water go off. The boiler stuttered and clunked a few times. He'd been meaning to look at it for ages. And the bathroom door clicked Door click unlocked. "Remus?" Sirius called out, a note of panic in his voice. "Bedroom," Remus replied. Sirius entered, his hair dripping on the carpet. He'd wrapped the biggest bath sheet round himself like a shawl, covering his whole body from neck to skinny ankles. Remus looked away, embarrassed, and gestured at the clothes laid out. "Here, I'll let you change." He made to leave, but Sirius's hand darted out and grabbed his arm. He had that wild look in his eye again. "Don't go," he said. "Could you stay in the room?" "Okay," Remus nodded, patting Sirius's claw-like hand. He'd been scratching at it again. It was red raw. Remus turned and looked at the curtains while Sirius dressed himself. His movement sounded slow, like an old man or an invalid, not like elegant, energetic Sirius Black. Fury seared through Remus. They took everything from him, he thought fiercely. Everything that made him who he was. When he turned round, Sirius was sitting at the bed. Remus looked too, trying to see it through Sirius's eyes. The neatly made bedspread, the matching bedside tables, one with a book on top, the other with a packet of cigarettes. "I'll sleep on the couch," Sirius said. "I don't want to muck up anything between you and, sorry, his name's gone. Grant." "Grant." Sirius looked away again. His eyes never rested long. He was always searching the corners of the room for something. "I've forgotten a lot, I think." "That's okay." Remus had never felt a pain like this, and Remus had been feeling pain most of his life. "Come and sit down. Cup of tea?" "Cup of tea," Sirius parroted back. Remus nodded slowly, then led him into the kitchen. "Thank you," Sirius said after a little while. "Sorry, I keep forgetting things." Remus touched his arm gently. "It's okay, go and sit. I'll be a minute, you can hear me from the living room." Sirius left silently. Remus breathed a sigh of relief. The atmosphere was still thick with memory and hurt and Azkaban, but at least it was bearable when Sirius wasn't standing right there. Last year in the shack, Remus hadn't had time to feel anything other than terror and joy, and typically he'd spent the rest of his time since trying to pretend none of it had happened at all. Not because he wanted to, but because it was the only thing he could do. He should have known better. He should have known that Sirius always demanded confrontation. He took a long time over the tea, brewing it in a pot rather than the electric kettle. How did Sirius take his tea? He couldn't remember. Maybe he'd never known. Sirius usually made it back then. In the end, Remus simply put out everything, setting up a tray with immaculate attention and care, as if he was serving the Queen. Slice of lemon, little jug of milk, bowl of brown sugar lumps. There weren't any biscuits left. Grant had had the last of the digestives. When it was all ready, he still hadn't had the nerve to carry it through. He panicked for a moment before hearing the door click open. Had it been a half hour already? "All right!" Grant's brash, over-loud Cockney accent filled the flat, warming it instantly. He acted as if it were nothing out of the ordinary as he bustled into the living room, laden with food. Remus could hear him setting it all out on the coffee table, unwrapping cartons of egg fried rice, sweet and sour chicken, chow mein, pork balls, Chinese ribs, spring rolls, all the while chatting away to Sirius. "Blimey, don't you look better after a wash, eh? Still got that nice thick hair. Jealous. I'll be bald by the time I'm 40, I reckon. Seen how grey Remus is? Looks distinguished, I tell him, but he don't listen." Fortified, Remus lifted the tray and carried it into the living room. Sirius was sitting primly on the edge of the couch, staring at Grant the way an animal stares at a potential predator. "I'll grab plates," Grant said, passing Remus on his way back to the kitchen. He didn't make eye contact. Remus didn't blame him. The situation wasn't fair on anyone, least of all Grant. Remus tried to smile at Sirius, offering the tea tray. "Here we are," he murmured. Sirius looked at the tea, the lemon, the sugar, then down at his hands. "Are you hungry?" Remus asked. "Is this all right?" Sirius nodded. "Lovely, thanks. You shouldn't go through all this trouble." "Nonsense." Grant brought in the plates. They sat round the coffee table, Sirius on the sofa, Remus in the armchair, and Grant on the floor. Sirius put food on his plate and picked at it like a bird. He didn't use the forks they'd put out or the chopsticks that came with the meal. He used his hands to eat, tearing everything into small pieces and feeding them into his mouth. Remus and Grant politely ignored it, making light conversation. "I'll have to do a proper shop on my way back from work tomorrow," Grant said. "Get you a toothbrush, some things like that." "I can do that," Remus said. He was keen to take care of Sirius himself, as if he'd brought home a stray he ought to be responsible for. He looked at Sirius. "Your clothes and books are boxed up in the garage. I'll go and have a look tomorrow." "You kept them?" Sirius looked up almost hopefully. "You kept my things?" Well, after everything, Mary showed up and did it for me. I wasn't very well for a while. I'm not sure what state they're in. I haven't been there since." "I didn't expect you to keep anything." Remus didn't know what to say, so he shrugged. It hadn't really been a case of wanting to hang on to Sirius's stuff, more that he'd just hidden away so he didn't have to think about it. He was glad now, obviously, but he didn't want any more credit than he was due. They finished eating and Sirius wiped his greasy hands on the legs of his pyjama bottoms, and Remus tried not to wince. Sirius used to be so fastidious about cleanliness. Remus's disorganization had always irritated him. Another change. Grant got up to collect the plates and cutlery for washing up. Sirius sat up. "I can do that, let me." He withdrew a wand from his baggy sleeve. "Where'd you get that?" Remus asked, frowning. "Stole it." Sirius looked down, turning it in his hand. "Took a while to get used to, but I think I can handle it okay now. Here, let me." "It's fine," Grant said. He was smiling, but you couldn't hear it in his voice. "I prefer to do it normally." He turned, carrying the pile of plates into the kitchen. "Muffliato," Sirius muttered. Remus blinked, surprised. He hadn't heard that spell in a very long time, and he'd never ever used something like that with Grant present. It felt disloyal, sneaky. "Is the flu connection working?" Sirius asked urgently. "No," Remus said. "I never reconnected. I don't actually do magic very much at home because..." "Yeah, because of the muggle," Sirius finished, and Remus could have sworn he rolled his eyes. "He's made a lot of changes, I see." He gave the TV a very pointed look. "It's his home too," Remus said defensively. "Whatever, I don't care. Right, we'll need to reconnect it. If I'm staying here, that is. We'll need to be able to communicate with the rest of the Order." "The rest of the..." "Have you got an owl?" Sirius glanced around. "No," Remus said. He chewed his lip. "I've got a phone," he offered, trying to lighten the mood. For Merlin's sake, Mooney," Sirius barked, his rough voice crackling with urgency. "What have you been doing all these years? Moping about?" Remus flinched, both at being called Mooney, which no one ever did, and at the cruel accusation. "I've been surviving," he said, trying to stay calm. "How easy do you think it is for me to hold down a job? And it's not as I've had anyone I need to keep in touch with." Sirius didn't say anything, but pursed his lips and scowled, looking at the carpet. Remus sighed, closing his eyes. "Look," he said gently, "I can imagine how you must feel. I know you want to do everything at once now you're free, but let's just take things slowly tonight, okay? Get a proper night's sleep, and we'll work on a plan tomorrow." Sirius nodded, mollified. Remus felt proud of himself. He hadn't cried or shouted, and that was pretty good progress as far as Sirius Black was concerned. Grant re-entered the room, and Remus quickly undid the Muffliato charm. "Shall I stick the telly on, then?" he asked the silent room. Remus nodded. Sirius returned to scowling. The news was on, and then the weather. Then some American hospital drama, which made Grant tut and switch over. There was a documentary on about Fleetwood Mac, which they all vaguely watched. No one really spoke, except Grant now and then. Remus was in turmoil, his brain whirring into overdrive as too many conflicting thoughts and feelings flashed past. It had been so long since he'd been in the same room as Sirius, and now they couldn't even talk to each other without hitting some immeasurable barrier, whether it was the war, or lost friends, or their mutual betrayal. And now the Order was reforming, and it looked like everyone expected Remus to sign himself up once again, without hesitation. But he wasn't the boy he'd been last time. He was old, and he was tired. He had other responsibilities. He had Grant. At about 10 o'clock, Sirius yawned. "Yeah, me too," Grant commented, yawning back. "Got work in the morning. Maybe it's time for bed." He looked at Remus, obviously hoping for some sort of direction. "Yes," Remus said, uncertain. He placed his hands on the arm of his chair to push himself up, stiff from sitting so rigidly all evening. "Sirius, are you okay? I'll get you a cushion and a duvet." "No need," Sirius said. He stretched again and transformed into Padfoot. Grant breathed in sharply at the surprise, but said nothing. The big black dog curled up on the couch and closed its eyes. "Can you do that?" "Can you do that?" Grant whispered half an hour later, once he and Remus were both in bed. "Turn into a wolf whenever you like." "No," Remus said. "He's an animagus. He learned how to do it. I'm a werewolf. I got bitten. I don't get a choice." "Bad luck," Grant said. "Mind you, don't think I'd like it much if you could." "He won't hurt you. He's still got his normal mind when he's a dog." though Remus wasn't sure what Sirius's normal mind was like anymore. Everything else about him was rumpled and damaged in some way. "Are you okay?" Grant said, turning his head to watch Remus's face. "I think so," Remus said. "But it's weird. It's going to be difficult, I think." "How long will he be here?" "Oh, I don't know. A while, maybe. He's talking about another war. I might need to help." "Remus?" I know. Remus screwed up his face. "I'm sorry, the whole situation is... It's a fucking nightmare, really. I need some time to think." "I wish I could help," Grant said. "I wish I understood." "You're so good with Sirius," Remus offered. "I don't know what to say to him. He's so... I don't know, prickly. I'm scared I'll say something wrong and he'll bite my head off." Well, I have a bit of experience with those types," Grant said, lips curling. "Anyway, he's obviously been through the mill. Just gotta be patient. Kind. You can't force him to get better, I'm afraid." Sirius slept for a long time. Long after Grant had left for work and Remus had eaten breakfast and marked a few exam papers. He stayed in the kitchen, but he could see the living room couch through the door, just in case. It was almost past 11 when Padfoot jerked awake and began barking loudly, leaping off the couch. "Shh!" Remus ran into the living room anxiously. "Sirius, it's me! You're here with me!" The dog stopped, cocked its head, then transformed back into Sirius. His eyes were wide and his jaw shadowy from stubble. He looked like a mad person. Remus tried to be patient and kind, like Grant said. "Sorry," he said, steadying his voice. "It's just we're not allowed pets here, and if the neighbors hear you..." "Sorry." Sirius looked down, embarrassed. "You'd think I'd be used to it now. Been out a year." "It's fine," Remus shook his head. "I'm sorry I shouted." Things stayed awkward like that for most of the day. They went out to the garage after Sirius had eaten breakfast. The door took a few goes to heave open, and Sirius had to stay in dog form while they were out of the flat, so it all fell to Remus. Still, they got in eventually, and everything was very much as they remembered. No motorbike, of course, though all the tools were still there. Sirius's clothes and books were neatly stacked in labelled boxes, without so much as a layer of dust on them. "Mary must have done some sort of preserving spell," Remus commented. Sirius nodded vaguely, walking through the piles of relics like an ancient monk. He selected a few things to take back to the flat, or rather for Remus to carry back. Sirius chose robes and wizard's clothes, none of his muggle stuff, not even his old leather jacket, which Remus found stuffed inside a box under some records. He had to resist the urge to bury his face in it and inhale the gorgeous scent, as if the jacket had more of Sirius in it than the man standing next to him. Back at the flat, Sirius changed into the robes at once. Remus could see why. He looked much better already in his own things, having had a few good meals and a proper wash. His hair was a bit scraggly and still had knots in it, despite the fact that he'd clearly used half a bottle of shampoo on it. He slept again after lunch. Remus didn't see how. He'd only been awake for a few hours. Still, despite Sirius's inability to stay still, he exhausted easily. He curled up on the couch again in the nest of blankets he created, and Remus sat down with him on the TV, with the TV on very low. At least when Sirius slept, he was a dog, and therefore easier to share a room with. He was grumpy when he woke up. He squinted at the TV, then at Remus. "Don't you read any more?" "Of course I do." Remus gestured at the bookcases either side of the fireplace, which were sagging under the weight. "TV's just background noise." Sirius grunted, sitting up and straightening his clothes. He ran his fingers through his hair, and they got caught. He winced. "Do you want to try washing it again?" Remus asked. "If you put loads of conditioner on, then comb it through, that might help." He remembered Grant telling him that about 2 brothers who'd come into the remand centre. They'd been neglected and had never had their hair cut or brushed, and they were frightened of the clippers. Grant remembered Matron's brutal buzz cuts, and he immediately promised them he wouldn't cut their hair. He'd spent hours gently combing it through instead, and his hands were wet and cold for so long his eczema flared up and his palms were rough and chapped for weeks. Sirius seemed to appreciate the suggestion, so Remus went to run the bath. Sirius followed him. He didn't want to be left alone at all, even if he didn't want to talk. Remus rooted around in the medicine cabinet for a good strong comb and some scissors, just in case. He set them on the edge of the bathtub and stepped back. Shall I leave you to it?" he asked as the bathwater steamed gently. Sirius rubbed his arm, looking around. "No, I think I'd rather... if you don't mind." "Anything you like," Remus said. "Let him lead the way," Grant had suggested. "Go with the flow." He thought about turning around as Sirius undressed, but that seemed redundant if he was staying in the room. And anyway, Sirius had no scruples about stripping off in front of him. There was nothing sensual about it. He did it in the same way he now ate with his hands, or wiped his mouth with his sleeve, or curled up tightly on the sofa. He did it because he'd forgotten to act around other people. He was so thin, so frail, his elbows jutted out like knives, and his hollow ribs moved under his paper-white skin. His once warm, slender wrists, which Remus had adored, were now so narrow they'd looked like they'd snapped if he lowered himself into the bath. Remus pretended to be tidying up the bathroom and started folding up the flannel hanging off the side of the sink, straightening the towel slung over the radiator. He was embarrassed. He didn't want to stare, though to be honest, Sirius probably wouldn't notice either way. Eventually, Remus sat on the closed toilet lid, crossing his legs in an effort to look nonchalant, and because the bathroom was much too small for his annoying, gangly body. Sirius leaned back into the hot water, making small, slow waves slop gently against the plastic sides of the tub. He closed his eyes and tilted his head back into the water, exposing his throat, his Adam's apple protruding. Remus had to remember to close his mouth as Sirius resurfaced, opening his eyes as sweeping his hair back. Now it was wet, the grey had vanished, and he became suddenly younger, more recognizable. He started lathering his hair with the shampoo, sitting up, leaning forward. Remus watched his bony white fingers clawing through the foam, and remembered how graceful Sirius had been as a young man, how every moment was perfectly weighted, how he used to treat his own body with such tenderness. The steam from the hot water stung Remus's eyes, and he had to blink away tears. Sirius rinsed out the shampoo, then started on the conditioner, using loads of it. Remus would have to buy more. "We ought to make a list," Sirius said abruptly. "What?" "A list," Sirius said, picking up the comb. "We ought to make one. People to get in contact with. For Dumbledore." "For Dumbledore," Remus repeated. He suddenly felt very tired. "Yeah, he said get in touch with the old crowd. Only my memory's shot, so you'll have to help. The names, you know." He tugged the comb through his knots hard. "You really want to go right back to war, don't you?" Remus said. Sirius turned and gave him a look of disbelief, and with a horrible sinking feeling, Remus realized that in Sirius's mind, the war had never ended. "Look," Remus tried to explain. "It's not that I don't believe in the cause, it's just... I remember how it went last time." "As if I don't," Sirius hissed, yanking at the comb in his hair. "I haven't been on holiday for 12 years. "No, I know, but..." Remus wished he'd stopped saying it like that. 12 years. What forgiveness could there ever be for that? "It's all we can do," Sirius said fiercely. "It's the only thing that matters." He raised the comb again, looking as though he were about to stab himself with it rather than groom himself. Remus couldn't stand it. "Stop it," he said, getting up. "You'll rip all your bloody hair out. Come on, let me do it." He rolled up a towel and put it on the floor to kneel on, grabbing the comb out of Sirius's hand. Sirius looked at him warily for a moment, and Remus realized that they had not been this close yet. They had hugged in the shack a year ago, but that had been pure adrenaline. It had not been intimate. This was. "May I?" Remus asked, softening his voice. Sirius nodded slowly, then turned his head so that Remus could reach. Leaning in, not too much, Remus began to work, sliding his fingers carefully through the slick black locks, gently easing the comb through in sections from the bottom up. Slowly, the knots began to loosen, giving way to that familiar old silken texture. It was difficult work and took a lot of patience, and the rest of the bottle of conditioner, but Remus finally felt like he was helping. He was in control, and he was doing something positive. Sirius was so quiet and still the whole time, tense at first, but gradually relaxing, bit by bit. Remus could practically see his tendons slackening. Once he was finished, Remus leaned back to survey his work. The muscles in his back ached like they were on fire, but it was worth it. He stood up shakily, a hand on the sink. Sirius raised his hands, moved them gingerly over his head, fingers skimming the smooth surface. "Thanks." "Any time," Remus smiled, sitting back on the loo seat. Sirius rinsed his hair a few more times, then climbed out and dried himself, getting dressed again. Remus expected him to look at himself in the mirror, but he didn't. He purposefully avoided it, keeping his eyes down. Back in the living room, Remus made them tea and some cheese on toast, because he wanted Sirius to eat as often as possible. He expected Sirius to fall asleep again, but he didn't. He took some paper from Remus's pile of exams and flipped it over, picking up a bureau too. "Okay," he said. "Moody, obviously top of the list. After he's recovered, of course. Wait till you hear what happened to him at Hogwarts. Then there's the Weasleys, and Mary." "No, not Mary," Remus said. "She won't. She's settled down now. She's got kids. And the Weasleys, they've got 7 kids, Sirius. You can't ask that of people." "I don't need to," Sirius said sharply. "They'll do what's right." "I can't see it that way," Remus said. "All I can see is the cost of another war." "We don't have a choice." I know. I just want us to think before we... What's happened to you, Remus? This isn't like you. You're supposed to be a Gryffindor." That struck a nerve. How dare he? "Quite a bit has happened to me, actually," Remus said acidly. "I lost everyone I ever cared about in the last war, so forgive me if I'm not thrilled about marching straight to battle again. I'm not 21 anymore." Sirius shook his head, still unable to comprehend. "We owe it to them, to Lily and James."
You gonna make it?
I don't know. "I don't owe them anything," Remus shouted, his face burning with anger. "Maybe you feel like you do, secret keeper, but if you recall, I wasn't fucking consulted on that one." He didn't know why he said it. It all just came tumbling out before he could stop himself. He hadn't realized how angry he really was until that moment. Clearly, Sirius hadn't either. "Moony. Don't you dare call me Moony. Don't act like we're still... like nothing's changed, like everything's fine, and I'm just going to do everything you say." He stood up. He needed to get out. He needed a break. He turned on his heel, heading for the door. "No, Remus, please!" Sirius cried out, his voice so taut and strangled it frightened Remus. He turned back. Sirius stared up at him from the couch, so small and wide-eyed. "Please don't leave me alone," he said. Remus relented, his temper draining away to nothing. He returned to his armchair and sat down again. He pursed his lips. He rubbed his eyes. "I won't," he said wearily. "I'm not going anywhere."
All right.
That was a long-ass chapter.
That was.
Woof.
And I see a great discussion going on in the chat right now, and I didn't want to cut you off because I saw how close we were to the end of the
Okay.
chat. So it's not in this, it's further up, but Just Chillin' did make a very good point that Remus comes across this way because this story is told from Remus's perspective, and no one hates Remus more than Remus. And that's why it paints Remus in a bad light.
Okay.
And then everything else.
Oh, I have
Right
to...
there. Yeah. Because I do believe... I do understand what Just Chillin' is saying. I'll wait till you finish reading before I go into my thoughts on Remus. Because I feel like I'm kind of neutral when it comes to Remus. But you're definitely more of on the side of I don't like him. So when it comes to Remus, I completely agree with your perspective that it's this fic about a disabled queer man living in two societies.
Neither of which fully accept him.
Yeah, both are kind of against what he is. And I do like that aspect of the story. The only reason why I'm like neutral when it comes to Remus was, again, it was 7th year, just because like there was really no way around it. Remus was very abusive to Sirius when they were in a relationship.
Yeah. All of these things, the living in two worlds, neither one of which accept you, either A, for your lycanthropy, or B, for your homosexuality, you know, and having to navigate that. But it doesn't give you an excuse to act like a shitty person to other people. Like, he outright... Just because you can be angry at the world. You can be justifiably angry at the world. But that doesn't give you the right to be toxic. Not just in the way that you speak to people, but using sex to also manipulate people is not okay either. It's just not.
Like I said, I think everything that happens with Remus's story outside of that 7th year was pretty good. I think he could have used a little bit more character development because it seems like he's kind of stuck. But again, that could be something that the author's going for, because neither one of the societies that he belongs in are willing to accept him and help him get through that. But it was, I'll say it a million times, this story would be so much better if they just cut out 7th year. That was the only part I can complain about, really.
I also think that if you're going to have this character that has such a big struggle, you need to have an arc for the character. And there were a lot of chapters where we did not get a continuation of an arc. We just sat stagnating for a really long time. And there were times where he was really, truly awful to Sirius. And there were moments where he loves Sirius so much, but yet he is constantly being tempted by other men all the time. And then he's specifically mean to Sirius, knowing that he's thinking right now, I am going to say the meanest thing that I can think of to upset Sirius as much as I possibly can. And then later, when we make up, we're not going to talk about it. All I'm going to do is say I'm sorry and then have sex with him. And then it'll all be fine.
I guess it's not so much that I hate Remus.
That's what I don't like about him.
Well, like I said, you hate him.
I do. I can't stand him.
I'm neutral. He's just kind of there. I think the characters around him tend to be a little bit more interesting. Like, Sirius is written very well. Grant is a great character.
Hands down, greatest character in the story.
Which is why
Grant is awesome.
We will definitely be reading the epilogue that you suggested, because I love Grant. I think Grant's a great character. Grace is Remus. Well, how so? I mean, yeah, like the endgame Sirius, but that's because he was locked up in Azkaban, so he never had that chance to emotionally grow.
It's Sirius.
I feel like, well, number one, I honestly think like canon Sirius should have or would have acted just like Remus is now. I think like Remus's personality is more of Sirius's personality, and I think they're kind of swapped from the canon.
Yeah. Once you get into the actual relationship dynamics of it, Sirius just, after a while, just becomes so submissive and
That's
scared
just-
of hurting and getting Remus upset. Like, I see. The problem that I have with self-hatred and all of these things, you can have a character who does all of these things and has all of these problems. However,
I was gonna say, I mean, we have different perspectives because I'm looking at it just as a reader's point of view, but you like to like study the writing and get into structures and that sort of thing. I just jump into a story and let it take me where it will, but you're like, you want to peek behind the curtain.
the self-pity in the story goes on for so long that it stagnates. And then he takes it and he lashes it out he lashes out at other people. And I'm not cool with that. I don't care how bad your childhood was. I don't care how much trauma you've been through. It doesn't give you an excuse to be mean to people. Period. And
I'll
the
go
problem
the whole-
is that it goes on for so long.
I'll
Like, oh my god. I just can't
I'll go
excuse
the-
that in my mind.
I'll go the writing route. I don't hate it because of that. If you want to have self-loathing, that's fine. I think the author just kind of missed the beats. I think the timing was off. Like, you had all this self-loathing and hatred and sadness before James and Lily's death, where you could have had them build up this
You're talking
loving, caring relationship with Sirius and them, and had him grow as a character.
You're talking
and
purely narrative.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then because it all comes back to this one point in the story, it felt like this is where it kind of stumbled for me, because through seventh year he was just depressed and self-hatred and everything. This is the time where I think I would have enjoyed the story more if you have him grow as a character. You know, everything's going good for him. Things are changing. He's finally developing. And
Yeah.
then James and Lily die.
Right, and then
he falls back to this.
yeah.
I just think they missed some timings. And it kind of feels like you never really got out of that funk in the story. So it kind of gets repetitive.
So just chilling is saying this is a highly political piece of fiction, even more than anything else. They see where we're coming from, but they have a completely different perspective when they read it. So they're just saying reading all of this just surprised them.
Oh, okay. I mean, that's fine. I'm not going to tell you how to...
No, everyone can read it in their own way and feel a certain way about it, how they want to feel about it. That's totally...
Well, that's the thing about, like...
And I get the perspective of it being highly political. Like, I get that.
That's also the thing about, like, any piece of art, is if it's good, no two people will see the same thing, you know?
And not everyone...
That's why people like abstract art. Because you can go there in one mood and see it as one thing, and go there the next day in a completely different mood, and you start to see other things.
Yep.
It's the same with, like, you know, well, any art, really.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with that. 100%.
So, you know, a book, like, I mean, what is it? Zen and the Art of
Motorcycle maintenance.
that's prized as a book because a lot of people say like you can grow with it. If you read it in your teens, you see a lot of the perspectives one way. Wait 10 years, read it again, and all of a sudden the book seems completely different.
I
Because
mean,
you see things in a different light, and you know, you keep on going, and as you get older you see things in new perspectives. So
that's how I feel about To Kill a Mockingbird. That's why I reread it every so often.
yeah,
Because I always get something new out of it. I just the abuse thing is what has really just how shitty he is to other people is just I I can't get past it. How terrible he is to other people really bugs me. And how people just take it and take it and take it and take it. It's like,
that's fair. I don't hate Remus. I got bored with him at that point.
I would agree with that with Dan. The struggle of being gay was written very well.
Yeah.
The struggle of being in love with Sirius was written very well. The werewolf thing,
That's what I mean.
the werewolf stuff.
Maybe we were
was,
just spoiled in the beginning because all of that was written so well.
It was. And then once we got into the werewolf stuff, like I really hated that.
I don't know why you hated it so much.
I hated it.
Hate it that much.
Oh, it just the mechanics of it drove me nuts. Couldn't stand it. Won't go on that soapbox again about the werewolf.
I was gonna
thing.
say, please
I
don't. I didn't mind the werewolf thing. Didn't do anything for me.
It just got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. It just got terrible, 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 terrible. Maddie says, "Why the heck is he jumping in the bath with Sirius?" Grant would be broken if he knew. I don't care if he didn't jump in completely. Just washing his hair while Sirius is naked is too intimate. No, Kayla, we did not end the book. We still have
3 chapters and an epilogue to read.
3 chapters and an epilogue to read. Yes.
We're just kind of discussing Remus as a character and his morality and that sort of thing.
Whoop, whoop.
Oh yeah, Anna makes a good point. I mean, yeah, the changes from canon.
Yeah, some of them were.
I mean, I thought.
Some of them were all right.
Yeah, some of them were all right.
One of my least favorites was making Greyback an intellectual. I thought that was terrible.
You just hate werewolves. Oh my god.
I don't hate werewolves. Why are you making me out to be like some Umbridge type of person?
You are.
I am not.
Those half-breeds!
You stop. I'm not a werewolf hater. The personality changes from canon were bad. I think is it mine? Go ahead.
I don't think they're necessarily bad, but I don't know. I think if you could have left Remus as he is, but I don't like how Sirius became so submissive. Like he's not Sirius.
No.
He's this headstrong kind of idiot.
Yeah, in a way, yeah.
Acts irrationally, and then you made him into this person who thinks things through and
keeps Remus under control.
Like no. You're gonna have Remus as this wild person. You just need to make them partners in crime at this point.
Yeah.
Make it a total catastrophe, a total cluster. You know what?
The next chapter is the Grant chapter.
Oh, the next chapter is the Grant chapter.
Yes.
It's not the epilogue?
There, I told
Or
you there's
maybe-
a Grant chapter specifically in here.
Yeah. Oh, okay, so there's a chapter and an epilogue.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. When Just Chillin' said that there was an epilogue with Grant, I thought it was
That's what I
you were
meant.
talking
No,
about.
no. The next chapter is from Grant's perspective.
How long is it? Think we got time, or I know you have to get up early tomorrow.
It's pretty short,
Okay.
actually. Should we just read it? Let's just do it.
All right.
Chapter 186. Summer, 1995. Grant. A long, long time ago, I watched him struggle with the sea. I knew that he was drowning, and I brought him in to me. Now today, come morning light, he sails away after one last night. I let him go.
First few lines, it felt like you were kind of building up to the Monster Mash tune.
Mr. Chapman, we are very pleased to extend the following offer of employment to you on behalf of Brighton and Hove City Council. Social worker, child and youth welfare. Please see the attached brochure for details on your salary and working hours. You have 30 working days to respond to this offer by either post or telephone. We look forward to hearing from you. A.P. Green, Head of Social Services, Brighton and Hove. Grant read the letter 3 times just to make sure. Well, he really ought to be happy, thrilled. This was amazing news. News worth celebrating. It was one way out of the mess he currently found himself in, anyway. He shook his head, feeling terrible for thinking of Remus's life a mess, even if that was a little bit true. He'd gone down for the interview a few weeks ago, telling Remus he was working late. Not that he wanted to hide anything from Remus, more like he just didn't want to jinx things. Grant wasn't a very lucky person, generally. Stuff like this never, ever happened to him. Grant didn't believe in God, or guardian angels, or Buddha, or Brahman, or anything other than his own willpower, but something about this job offer smacked of divine intervention. This was his dream job, after all. Perhaps this is the sign he was waiting for, as if old ex-boyfriends returning from prison wasn't enough of an omen. He'd been toying with the idea of moving for years. Grant loved London, it would always be in his blood, but they were both in their mid-30s now, and maybe it was time for a change. He wanted Remus to get out to the countryside, to fresh air and sea and space, a fresh start away from that miserable little flat. So when the position came up, and Grant's manager mentioned it to him, he leapt at the chance. Of course, that was all before Sirius came back. Grant reread the letter again from the top. He stared at his name, in official black and white printed text. A letter with my name on it, and it's not even a court summons, he joked to himself. He wished he could show his dickhead grandfather, show him what Nancy boy delinquents can amount to when they put their minds to it. He was proud of himself, and no matter what the situation was right now, he knew Remus would be proud of him too. He wished he could tell him straight away, but Remus was out, and Grant was hiding in the bedroom from Sirius. Grant was supposed to be keeping an eye on him. He'd promised, but as soon as Remus was out the door, Sirius said something nasty about not needing a nursemaid. Bloody hell, how posh was he? And turned into a dog again. It was so painfully obvious that Black hated Grant's guts, so hiding out in the bedroom felt like the best solution. He'd have to wait for Remus to get home then, to break the news. He hoped it wouldn't be too long, but he had no idea, really. Remus had gone to some sort of meeting and hadn't given Grant any details. He talked to Sirius about it, though, at length. They muttered together in the living room, thinking Grant wouldn't notice. The pitch of their whispering swung wildly to and fro. One moment angry staccato hissing, the next soothing low apologies. Their body language was the same. Grant learned quickly that the important stuff between Sirius and Remus was the stuff neither of them said out loud. It was all in looks, gestures, tilted heads and raised eyebrows. Impossible for an insider to keep up with. And Grant felt very much the outsider. He'd never known two people who could be simultaneously so angry with each other and so much in love. And it was love, without a doubt. Grant got a sick feeling in his stomach. He'd been ignoring it for days. Remus had been different for a while, but until that bloody black dog showed up, Grant had thought there might be hope for recovery. A bit more time, a bit more space, some distance from all that darkness. Grant would pull Remus back from the edge. He'd done it before. He could do it again. But now it looked impossible. Remus did not want things back the way they were. He hadn't said it. Maybe he didn't know it. But it was very obvious to Grant. Look, okay, Grant knew he was not the brightest bulb in the box. Not as clever as Remus, anyway. Probably not as clever as Sirius. That had never bothered him much, because, after all, he couldn't be anyone but himself, and he had plenty else going for him. He worked hard, and he cared about people, and people cared about him, and those things were ingredients for a very happy life, in Grant's opinion. So he wasn't a genius, but he did know some things. He liked to think that, at the very least, he knew when it was time to make a graceful exit. Grant loved Remus very much. He probably loved him ever since that first day, 20 years ago, when the lanky, exhausted, skittish teenager had loped into the dorm room at St. Edmund's. He was so quiet and so closed up, even though there was clearly a universe inside of him. Remus was never the same person twice. He was jaded and world-weary one moment, naive and blushing the next. He was bubbling with rage and love at the same time, and most of the time he let love win. Grant liked to think he'd had a bit of a hand in that, especially over the last few years. Grant had worked hard to keep the softest parts of Remus safe, and he had. He'd done a good job. He'd taken care of him, until Remus really didn't need taking care of anymore. It was perhaps time to let go. He still didn't want to just hand him back like a borrowed book. Grant had said goodbye to plenty of people over the course of his short yet colourful life, and not one of them had meant a thing, until Remus. Grant knew how pathetic that sounded. Nearing 36 and only one real relationship, only one true friendship. Whatever happened, they would stay friends. There was no question of that. But Grant knew he had to be practical, and he had to look after himself for once. Remus had always belonged to another world. That was partly what made him so attractive. The time had come for Remus to go back where he belonged, and though Grant knew that for a while the absence would hurt, it was completely necessary. It reminded him of that Suzanne Vega song. Grant was never one for reading too much into lyrics, not like Remus. He didn't have a poetic soul. But when the Solitude Standing album came out, it had been all over the radio, and Grant quite liked it. He always meant to buy the album, but never got around to it. She had a haunting voice, and this one particular tune was ghostly and strange. He told Then Remus had told him what it was about, and he hated it. He didn't usually like fairy tales. Having recognized his sexuality at the age of 6, the idea of brave knights rescuing damsels in distress had never inspired him much. But something about Calypso really struck a nerve. He knew he wasn't a siren, sitting on the rocks jiggling his tits at passing sailors, but he knew Remus. He knew Remus inside and out. He'd seen the change in him since Sirius came back. At first, Remus had clung to Grant as his protector, which made sense. A bit of regression was probably to be expected, and Grant had always done his best to be solid ground for Remus. But after the stress of the first few days had passed, Remus and Sirius had both relaxed a little bit, and everything was different. So different that it was shocking. Grant hadn't really known what their relationship was like when they were young, but he caught glimpses of it now. The way Remus stared at Sirius, as if he was the most gorgeous creature on earth. The heat in his eyes, the way his tongue played at the corner of his mouth, like he was daydreaming something utterly filthy. Remus had never looked at Grant like that. Not really. And Sirius lit up when Remus spoke to him. Yes, they were obviously still in love, and it was not the same kind of love that Grant and Remus had. He didn't know if it was better or not, but he could practically feel the conflict tearing Remus apart. He didn't want to tear Remus apart. He never had. He still wanted to keep him safe. And there was Sirius himself, prim and poisonous, lurking like a spider all the time, glaring daggers whenever Grant entered the room. He made his feelings perfectly clear, and it made Grant indignant, made him want to fight all the harder to keep Remus. But it wasn't up to Grant anymore. Remus was going somewhere Grant couldn't follow him. They'd reached a crossroads, and it was all very clear. Maybe the letter really was an omen. He conjured up the image he'd been toying with, of him and Remus in a house by the sea, reading books and eating breakfast in bed and going for walks into town, getting older, making new friends. If they had a big enough house, they could begin fostering. Grant had been interested in doing that for years. He wanted to take care of kids no one else wanted, and it was going to be a social worker. If he was going to be a social worker, then he'd be a perfect candidate. He let the fantasy wash over him one last time, and then he began to dismantle it. Because deep down, Grant knew that Remus would never have left London anyway, and Remus would never want to foster children. He'd be too afraid he'd hurt them on a full moon. That future had always been a bit of wishful thinking. It was more about Grant than Remus. It was time to stop worrying about Remus and what Remus needed. That wasn't his responsibility anymore. Perhaps there would be someone else for Grant. He hoped so. He would never stop looking. Perhaps someone would want to keep him safe for a change. Stranger things happened at sea. The decision was made. Grant wrote a formal response accepting the job offer. He'd post it on his way out. He began to pack quietly, hoping that Remus wouldn't come home until he was finished. There was so much to do, but at the same time, not a lot. Grant found himself surprised by just how easily the plan came together. He had his own bank account, and he didn't have any stake in the flat. He could stay at his aunt's pub down in Hove until he found his own place to live. He even had friends in Brighton, from where he'd lived as a kid. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. So once he'd packed, he'd just need to say goodbye. He hoped he could say it the right way. It'd not sound bitter or self-pitying. He hoped Remus would understand that Grant would always be there if he needed him. He'd come running in a heartbeat. At the same time, he hoped that Remus would not need him. He hoped that he was leaving him in safe hands. Finished packing, Grant sat on the bed. He could hear the TV up in the other room, up a bit too loud. Sirius left it on all night sometimes, and it woke Grant up. But if he went to turn it off, that hideous black dog would wake up and start growling at him in the dark. Probably a trauma thing. Grant didn't blame Sirius, but he wished he didn't have to manifest like that. Could he really trust a man like that to take care of anyone? Grant's heart ached as he imagined Remus, sweet, serious, sensitive Remus, being treated like a mental punching bag. He would just put up with it. Grant could tell. Remus felt so guilty about Sirius's imprisonment that he was willing to take all sorts of abuse for it. But that wasn't right. Grant stood up. He had to do one more thing then before he could leave. He had to talk to Sirius.
I'm sure that'll turn out great. Absolutely fan. Is this why Sirius goes to live in the
Grimald place?
yeah. Or the cave? Wasn't about Harry. This one just got away from Remus because Grant told him he was a bad influence on him.
No,
Yeah.
Goblet of Fire's already happened.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Forgot. Okay. We skipped around so much.
Poor Grant.
I know.
Poor Grant.
I hope in the epilogue we find out that he
Dude.
found someone and he's fostering his
Living
first child
happily
or
ever
something.
after. God, I
Yeah.
hope so. I just feel so bad for Grant.
Yeah, I know.
But he is just so graceful.
The man has literally been Remus's conscience this entire time.
Yep. Yep.
Sirius being a bit pure blood, of course.
Grant is just... Grant marries Albus. Bit of an age gap, but they're happy.
Albus fakes his own death to run away with Grant.
There you go. Grant is just such a dignified, good person. It's just crazy. You have two individuals who have had some of the very, very same experiences, and look how wildly different those experiences turned them out to be.
I think that's kind of the point, though.
Yeah.
To have Grant in it. See. That a certain experience doesn't condemn you to be one way.
Right.
Right, you had Remus, which, true, he had to deal with two sides of the same coin with
the werewolf
thing. But either way, he spent the entire time in this self-loathing pity fest. Meanwhile, Grant, went out there and made something of himself. And is using that grief to, fuel his drive to help children not have to go through
what he went through.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's the point of Grant. Show you're not a product of your
experiences. You can choose.
You're not a product of your environment.
Harry is proof of that too.
Mm-hmm. My
Harry...
God, Grant is the story's Harry.
He is, in a way. Harry is this kid who has been abused horribly his whole life, and he is nothing but just kind and good.
Mm-hmm.
And wants no one to ever go through what he's been through. And Grant is the same way. And then you have Remus, the main character, who is inflicting that on everyone else. And it's just like, ugh. Ugh. But I do genuinely feel bad for Grant here. But he is being so mature and so adult about it. And he's just like, no, he always knew he was never going to win that. But
yeah.
Now that
it's one of those things where the story's getting some credit back for me.
Absolutely.
I don't like where Remus is going. Maybe you're supposed to hate Remus by the end. Who knows? And maybe all the other characters are supposed to grow and do better. But I mean, all the other characters, everything's written really well.
It is. Everything is really well.
Discussion about all the hate for Remus, but that doesn't mean we don't like the story. Well, maybe for you, but I think everything's written really well.
Everything is written really well. It's just whether or not I like it. It's different.
Well, yeah. But Saturday, we'll get to finish it.
We will get to finish it on Saturday. And Maddie, you are right. He knows instantaneously Remus is still in love with Sirius and always was. And it's really got to hurt.
Mm-hmm.
It does. Because I think Grant always knew, but part of him just hoped that with enough... he says, with enough time, he felt like it was...
I think he was just hoping that Sirius would be stuck there for life. Might love Sirius, but Sirius is locked up in prison. Can't really do much about it.
Yeah.
He's stuck with me.
He's got to settle. But yeah. Oh, Grant. Grant. Either way, we will be back on Saturday to finish this story.
Harry is very much a product of his environments.
Well, he is. I'm just saying in this, he's not a product of his environment in the way that he inflicts the pain he felt on other people.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Well,
Harry is incredibly resilient.
Well, maybe Goblet of Fire. Or was it Order of the Phoenix? Which is Caps Lock Harry?
Order of the Phoenix.
Order of the Phoenix. So, maybe a little Order of the Phoenix.
I just mean in the sense that he experienced a lot of trauma and he is incredibly resilient for having gone through what he goes through. That's what I meant.
Oh yeah.
But yeah. We're almost done. We're almost there.
Mm-hmm.
Almost done with all the young dudes.
How do you think it's gonna end?
Wish I say I cared more, but I really don't.
Oh, we got what? 2 more chapters now? 2 more chapters plus the epilogue, or was it 3 more chapters plus the epilogue?
Well, yeah, he hates Malfoy. Malfoy is a bully. Malfoy inflicts pain on other people, like the Dursleys did. That's why he hates him.
2 more.
2 more, and then the Out of the Blue that we'll read. So yeah, that's it. Almost done.
So,
and I need to eat food, so we do have to go.
Okay.
I am sorry, everyone, but I am hungry.
You know what would be great for canon is if Teddy ended up with Grant.
Ew. No.
Why?
Ew. That's creepy. I loved your dad.
It's
now
like
I'm gonna love you. Ew, no.
Not like, well, you're making it creepy.
It is
like
creepy.
that.
I'm gonna fall in love with the son of the man I was in love with. Ew.
It's what could have been their child.
No.
Bad me.
Bad you. No. All right. Anyway, on that note, we will. Are we talking about Lord of the Rings tomorrow?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm not sure what time we'll be streaming tomorrow, but we will be streaming about.
I'll post the live stream up. I gotta check to see how long the episodes are, and we'll calculate that.
The new episodes of the Lord of the Rings show, Rings of Power. So catch us tomorrow for that.
So we'll be streaming right after we watch them. They premiere at 9, so we'll probably be on late.
I'm going to be so tired for the kangaroos tomorrow.
All
right, everyone.
All right.
Have a good
night, everyone. Take care.
See some of you tomorrow.